Hi, I'm Harry Rock, and welcome to another edition of the Westfield Council on Aging Presents. This is a special collaborative between Tina Gorman, Executive Director of the Westfield Senior Center, and Pete Coles, who is the producer and chief engineer for WCPC Westfield Cable Channel 15. Our topic today is navigating senior living options, and my guest is Eric Ostheim, who is the owner of the Oasis Senior Advisors in Western Massachusetts. He is a certified living advisor. And Eric, I just want to welcome you to the show.
Thank you.
Excited to have you here. First of all, where do you come in from? Where are you located? Where's your office?
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. I live in Belchertown, and I have sort of a home office.
Okay.
Most of us who are senior living advisors are out on the road most of the day, working with families, visiting senior living communities, but my territory is all of Western Mass. It's quite a large territory. So although I'm in Belchertown, I'm in Westfield, Berkshire County, all over the place.
So what is the primary role and responsibilities of your business and your services? And I think that this is a really critical topic because it really relates to the time in life when seniors have to start thinking about leaving their own homes that they've lived in their entire lives and going into either assisted living situations, assisted care, nursing situations, whatever it might be. What does your business do, and what can people expect to get from your services?
Sure. So it's really twofold. The main service, the main focus of what I do is, as a certified senior living advisor, I am helping exactly what you said, seniors, and oftentimes the adult children of seniors who may be the ones who are driving the decision making or at least reaching out for information, who either want to or typically need to leave whatever living situation they're in, often their home, whether it's a home or a condo or an apartment, and help them understand and navigate the choices for whatever that next step is, which for me is sort of runs the options of senior living communities. So that's independent living, assisted living, and memory care, traditionally. So that's one part of it. And so it's helping with that entire process, and I can go into more detail about that. The other part of it is helping seniors who need something, are not ready to move, don't have any intention of moving, or don't need to move, don't want to move, but they need more help in the home. So what services can they get? What assistance can they avail themselves of that will help them continue to live safely, independently, productively in the home? So although those aren't services I provide myself, I'm connected to a large network of elder care professionals in the area, and I help connect those folks to elder care attorneys or home care companies, respite services, whatever they're looking for.
That's really interesting. You mentioned memory care. What is that?
So it's a great question because it is a term that people hear a lot, and we seem like we're hearing more of it recently, especially in the wake of the pandemic. But memory care can be a standalone senior living community setting, but most often, and especially here in Western Massachusetts, it's usually part of an assisted living. So it's usually a wing or a neighborhood or a separate section within an assisted living that is secure for residents who are dealing with an Alzheimer's diagnosis, some sort of dementia, and who either because they might be prone to wandering or have just greater needs than what can traditionally be provided in assisted living, need to be in a secure environment with separate staff, higher staff to resident ratio, specific programming for memory, for cognitive impairment, and programming and living arrangements that are specifically designed for their needs. So that's what memory care is.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
So I spent some time on your website, and you do refer to the fact it's a free service.
Yes.
So people who come to you, they don't have to incur any expense. Is that correct?
That's correct. None whatsoever. And I know and I'm glad you asked the question because people should be rightfully skeptical of that. Seniors.
It's never a free meal.
Right. Seniors especially, who are the target of a lot of scams and different things, unfortunately. The easiest way to explain it is, so it is free to clients, is I tell clients, and this is usually one of the first things I say because it's usually one of their first questions, is think of me almost like a real estate agent for senior living. When you're selling or buying a home, and you're working with a real estate agent, every time you go out to look at a house, you're not paying that person an hourly rate, but you know that if you do buy or sell a home, that there's a commission at some point in it for the real estate agent. That's the same thing here. So if I'm working with a family and I refer a family to a community in Westfield or some other city or town, and that family moves in, then that community will pay me, my company, a referral fee. And so what's nice about it is that referral fee that they pay me is just the sort of natural course of doing business. We're a referral and placement industry, so it's a recognized industry with our own professional association and all those things, and it doesn't get marked up or added on to the costs that the families pay when they move into their costs are what they are. The referral fee that's paid to me is paid by the community, and it doesn't impact the family in any way. I have no way of charging, no desire to charge clients. It's one of the things I really like is I can work with families for as long as they want. We never have to talk about money, and it doesn't cost them anything.
So there's no risk in them contacting you?
No, that's a great question. There's no risk and there's no obligation. So a lot of times people will reach out and they'll just say, I don't really know. I don't know if I'm ready. I don't know if mom or dad is ready, but I want to understand the landscape of options. I want to understand that if in 1, 2, 5 years we do this, what we're going to be faced with. And so I tell them, we'll have a conversation. We can go out and see a couple places if you want, but just understand when you're done, there's no risk, there's no obligation to continue working with me to make the move. It's just the nature of just like you might decide to not buy or sell a house.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. So what are the decisions, and I'm sure this is the thing that all families struggle with is what are the decisions that have to be taken into consideration when a person or family decides to move their loved ones out of their home into a senior housing situation? I mean, that's got to be a complex issue.
Complex
and emotional as well.
Word for it. Yeah. Well, you hit on one of the. I was going to say it is a complex dynamic. There are a lot of sort of considerations, and I tend, for the sake of my clients, to sort of break them down into 4 areas. The first one is emotional, and you said it. So emotional is first one because it's often the first sort of barrier to overcome. The other 3 would be financial, physical, and logistical, I guess is the best way to describe it. So just to give a couple examples of each of them, I mean, emotional, the notion of leaving a home that you've lived in independently, either by yourself or with a spouse or other family member for a number of years, leaving that situation and going to an apartment. My mother went through this. She's a farm girl from Iowa. She's never lived in an apartment in her entire life. She's not about to right now at the age 83. She may eventually.
Good for her.
But yeah, so it was a very emotional thought process for her to think about, on the one hand, losing that space, losing the home, which is the home that I grew up in and was a family home, some of the possessions, because and I'll talk about this with logistical, there's a downsizing consideration to it. But it also is deeply connected with the idea of losing your independence, that when you move from that place you've lived and been independently, even if you haven't been doing so well and maybe not as independent as you would like to be, the idea for many seniors of moving to a senior living community, even to independent living, where you don't have to, the idea is that you don't sacrifice or you don't give up any of your independence, is still a daunting one, and it's an emotional one. So the emotional factors are that loss of independence, the notion of leaving a place that you've lived all your life, or the kind of living situation you've lived in all your life, going from maybe being someone who feels like they are not a social creature and like being alone to a place now where you're amongst others,
right? And
there are social pressures, although I think that's largely a really good thing and a beneficial thing, but for some people that's a consideration. And then the personal possessions, which can be as large as the house itself, a piece of furniture, just down to clothing and memorabilia and just family heirlooms that just by nature of the smaller space you're likely moving to, you can't take all that with you. So emotional is a big one. Physical is the next one, and those considerations are at a certain point, not for everybody. Many people are able to age in place and stay in their home until their very last day and never have to go through this thought process. They may be able to bring in some help, which helps them, do that safely. But for many people, they do have to go through the thought process of, physically, can I live in this space safely? Not most houses, depending on when they were built, are not necessarily accessible. They're not senior friendly. They might have rugs that are trip hazards. They might not have grab bars, wide enough hallways for, or thresholds for wheelchairs, changes in elevation that aren't conducive to a walker. There's a lot of things like that. And so for the seniors and for the children who are thinking about their loved ones, thinking about things, whether or not falls have become prevalent and, more recent, whether or not they find that they are restricting they might live in a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial home, but for the last couple of years they were restricting their actual living space to a very small area from the kitchen to the bathroom to the living room, where they're now sleeping in a lazy boy, for example. And so if they're finding that physically the space that they're using is reducing or decreasing, then that's a consideration. And then also what we call ADLs, activities of daily living. So if the individual or their family member is finding that things that mom or dad used to do independently and do regularly have started to be more difficult or have fallen by the wayside. And it can be hygiene, nutrition, it can be cleanliness of the home, because it's more difficult to get in and out of a shower without the worry of falling, or a tub, let's say, or upper body dressing, lower body dressing is more challenging. So you tend to stay in the same clothes, and now you're not showering as often, then your hygiene can fall by the wayside. Getting out to buy food is more difficult, so your nutrition and your eating is becoming less consistent. Those physical things, toileting issues, transferring, moving about, are all things that I help families evaluate and determine if it's at a certain point where a certain amount of help is needed, then it may be the right time to make that move. Financial considerations is the third one. We can go into that in more detail because it is by itself is a complex issue, but thinking about do I have between my income and my assets, whatever they are, whether or not I have things like long-term care insurance, which I'll talk more about, can I afford an independent living, an assisted living, or a memory care living situation, and for how long? And what happens if I'm still living and my assets run out? That's a huge consideration.
Oh, yeah.
So financial. And then the last one is just logistical. And it actually circles back to the emotional, because sometimes I have people who know they need to move, but they can't get over that emotional or logistical barrier of how in the world do I deal with 50 years of possessions and downsizing and selling this home. It just seems too overwhelming. And thankfully there are services that help with that process. So that was a very long-winded answer, but it's a very complex and very good question.
No, that is a complex question. Yeah. And you really, quite frankly, nailed it. There's a lot of information there. One of the things, as you were talking about it, the first things I thought about is privacy.
Yeah.
It's the loss of privacy,
yes.
because you're living in your home. We all love our privacy. We cherish it. We're social creatures, so we enjoy the social aspect when we choose to.
Right.
But if you're going into and I liked your term, senior living community, now, are you giving up total privacy? What is that like?
No, it's a great question, and it's something that I pretty much 100% of the time have some level of discussion with the senior or the family with, and it really is a kind of akin to the independence discussion. By virtue of moving to one of these communities, it does not mean that you are automatically giving up either your independence or your privacy. There are some changes to those things. It is a more supportive living environment than what most people are coming from, because that's typically what people require. And so the nature of your privacy and the nature of your independence is not the way I tell people to look at it is, don't think of it as being diminished. Think of it as being different, having a different quality. You still in the three sort of levels of care that I help people evaluate and move into are independent living, assisted living, and memory care, starting from the most independent to the least independent, which is memory care. And these are all levels that come before someone would then cross a threshold from what are social models of living, because they are social models of living, and home-like environments with your own apartment and, common area that you now share with other residents, to a medical model of living, which is a nursing home, which is different from the ones that I'm talking about. So you still have your own apartment, so you still have privacy. It can be a one-bedroom apartment, it could be a two-bedroom apartment, it could be a studio apartment. You have your privacy. However, you're in a community now where some of the eating, maybe not every meal, but some of the meals will be in a communal setting, in a dining room, restaurant-style dining.
Right.
That's different than living at home. That's less private. It's really no less independent, except for in the sense that you're not preparing the meal. But you still have control over that. In the communities, they are not going to force you to participate in activities that you don't want to participate in. This is your home. This is your determination. I think there are wonderful benefits to being as active physically and socially as possible. There are a lot of studies around how bad isolation and loneliness is for seniors as they age, and conversely how good sort of reigniting some of that social interaction, if you've been missing it for a while, is for you. And independence, the idea is the help is there to support you how you need it in a way so that you can do those activities of daily living safely. It doesn't mean someone is going to bathe you. It means what they may do, depending on what your level of care requirements are, they may come in and they may sit in your living room while you go in and get in the shower, because what you need is standby supervision. If you've been having falls, you might just want the security of knowing that there is a certified nursing assistant on the other side of the door that you can call to if you need. So it's a great question. The nature of the privacy and the independence is different, but you are by no means, in my opinion, forfeiting it, giving it up.
Yeah, you're throwing some great terms out here. Standby supervision.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's where a person can come. They're not invading your personal privacy, but
they're there
in case you need help.
Right. When I meet with families and they say, I don't know if mom could be okay in independent living or assisted living, or does she need memory care? Maybe she needs a nursing home. I start by talking to them about the ADLs, the activities of daily living. And I say, well, right now with showering, for example, does she need which of these levels? Is she completely independent, doesn't need any assistance? The next level would be standby supervision, which is just there if you need me. The next level might be some physical assistance, and the highest level of care generally is more complete physical assistance. So from the example I gave of the person just needing standby supervision to someone who might need help being transferred from a wheelchair into a shower chair and then physically needs help bathing, drying off, getting back out and being clothed. And whatever setting you're in, and what the setting I'm describing here is more typical of an assisted living or a memory care setting where those kind of services are provided. They're not generally provided in independent living because you're still doing those things for yourself.
Right.
They're going to do an assessment, and they're going to develop a personalized care plan that is catered to exactly what you want and what you need. Their concern is what level of support do you need surrounding you without sort of unnecessarily impinging on your independence, when not necessary, to do that in the activity of daily living consistently, safely, and correctly. That's what they're there to do. So, so that's again kind of a long-winded answer to the question, a very important question, something that is definitely, if you haven't thought about it as a senior who's maybe thinking about this, or maybe more importantly, to the adult children out there. Don't assume mom and dad are okay with the idea of giving up some level of control over their privacy and their independence, because you probably wouldn't be, and they're not going to be either. But it's how you talk about it, and that's where I can be helpful, or someone like me can be helpful. It is an emotionally wrought topic that you need to talk about.
So, that raises an interesting question. Yeah. Do these topics and questions come up from the children because they see an issue, or from the people living in the situation saying, you know what, I'm really struggling with this, and this just isn't working. I've got to find a new situation.
Where does it come from? A little bit of both is the answer. And if I had to ballpark it, I would say more often than not, maybe 60-40, 70-30, it's the adult children who have said, I've noticed this decline, or I live out of the area and I came back for the holidays And I just noticed mom or dad seem much more frail. And so sometimes they're talking to mom and dad and they're saying, look, I think we need to think about it. No, I'm not going to, we're not going to force you to move anywhere, but I want to look into resources and so forth. And sometimes they don't talk to mom and dad about it and they just call me directly and they get the information. They say, I want to go into my first conversation with my loved one armed with kind of an understanding of what services are available. So it really comes from all over the board. Nobody has ever come to me in the 4 years I've been doing this, take me away, sort of, I want to leave. Oh, that's not true. There actually are some who want to go into independent living because they're lonely and they're craving that social interaction. But for the most part, people are reluctant, but they have reluctantly acknowledged that this is what they need if they want to be safe and happy, because that's a big part of it is.
Do people have to come to your office or do you go to their home?
No, I'll meet folks wherever they want. And so pre-pandemic, I was always coming to people's homes or if they just, like, who's this guy? I don't know if I want some stranger that I haven't met coming into my home. We would meet at a cafe, at a coffee shop, or if it was nice weather in a park. But generally, that's part of what my service is that I want to come and meet the person. It also helps me to see what their living situation is and to sort of understand when someone says, I'm not using all of the space in my home, or I don't think my space is safe. It's helpful for me to kind of be there with them and see that. That kind of helps me, I think, do a better job of sort of understanding their situation and then giving good advice. So they're welcome to come to me in my home in Belchertown, and we can sit out on the back deck and have the conversation, but that's not necessary. I'll be more than happy to come to them.
What is your entire catchment area? How far do you what's your service
What's
area?
my service area?
How far do you drive?
Yeah, I drive really wherever I need to. Technically, the way it's drawn is pretty much all of Hamden, Hampshire County, a little bit into Franklin, and most of Berkshire County. But really what it is if you just cut off Massachusetts I-91 west of the Berkshires and surrounding areas, because Oasis is a national company. It's franchised. We each are owners of our own business. The nearest Oasis franchisees are in Connecticut, in Fairfield County, or out in Boston. We don't have anybody right now in northern Connecticut. And so I'll help in northern Connecticut, southern Vermont, central Mass, because the adult children and the seniors don't always live in the same place. So you might have a son that is in East Longmeadow, but mom or dad live in Windsor, Connecticut. So it's really that whole area. And I love going to different places. So you give me an excuse to drive out to the Berkshires, and I'll go out there, or to southern Vermont, or
except right now with gas prices.
Except with gas prices, and except in a winter storm, right? Exactly.
You said you've been doing this 4 years. Yep. What did you do before that?
It's a great question. I came into this without a background in elder care, without a background. I'm trying to think of all the things that would have been good to have a background in. Without a background in elder care, without a background in social work or nursing/health care. I had worked for a company for 20 years in a completely unrelated industry where I was, our company was helping large corporations who were doing international business. So when they were moving employees around, my company was training them in foreign languages and translating their documents, giving them cultural training, what to expect when you go on a 3-year assignment from New Jersey to Tokyo, Japan, things like that. And my role in there was really business operations, sales, and marketing. And so when I started looking at the possibility of buying a franchise, I came to it from a standpoint of operating a business and then learning the specific industry, sort of prior to buying the company and running it, and on the job. And that's exactly, what I've done. And I think it would be great to have a background, someone who has a background in social work and has done this in some way, shape, or form before. But many of the franchise owners don't. They come to it from a completely different background. I have to say, I love the work. I enjoy the work. I love working with seniors and their families. What I most enjoy is finding a family who's usually experiencing some level of stress, because this can be a stressful situation, overwhelmed by all the things they have to deal with, don't know where to begin, and help simplifying that, taking a lot of that work off their plate, and getting them hopefully quickly and painlessly, or less painlessly, to a point where they can say, I know I have a well-informed understanding of what my options are, and I can make a great choice for myself or for mom and dad, and helping them solve that problem that address that situation is very rewarding. So I really like that aspect of it.
Yeah, you clearly know your topic, and you're very passionate about it. I admire that.
It's very fulfilling.
And that's an important
Yeah.
part. You got to love what you do.
Right.
And I think for the people that you're serving, they want to know that you're interested in them as individuals. This isn't just a business situation.
You're not just moving them,
trying
right?
to help
yeah,
people.
exactly. You're trying
Right.
to help them.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the various care options that are available,
Yep.
because as I was on your website, there's a lot of different options that
there
people
are.
really need to think about.
Yeah. No, there are, and they're great. And they start really when the individual's living at home, sort of sometimes before my services come in, because they're, just because someone might be struggling at home, it depends on the nature of the struggle. It doesn't mean they necessarily have to leave their home. There are a lot of great services, home care, both medical and non-medical services, that can come into the home. There are adult day programs. So if you have a couple and one of the husband, wife, or partners, and one of the spouses or partners is dealing with a dementia diagnosis, and the other spouse or partner has now found him or herself in a position of being more often that person's caretaker than their spouse or partner, that can be a very untenable and overwhelming situation. Both, it can be not great for the person who's providing the care because it can be exhausting and overwhelming, but it can also not be great. It is also potentially not ideal for the loved one who's dealing with the cognitive diagnosis, because they really need and deserve the care of skilled, trained professionals, right? So there are services available where, with transportation, where that person can go out for the day, so that the spouse or partner can be home and get a break and sleep, or go out for a walk, or tend to whatever else it is they need to do. So there are a lot of home-based services like that. There are sort of center-based services like respite services and adult day services. And it's really when you move into the kind of senior living community part of the spectrum where I come in, although I can help people find good solutions for those home care services. I can refer them to trusted partners. The levels of care that I really help with are the ones I mentioned before: independent living, assisted living, and memory care, because they are the ones that are the social models of living. They're what I collectively refer to as senior living communities. They are home-like environments, and my goal is to explore all the options and find a solution, if we can, to help keep a loved one out of long-term living in a nursing home, if at all possible. And that's not to disparage nursing homes or long-term, care in a nursing home, but it's to, the idea is the least restrictive, the least expensive. Well, I shouldn't say least expensive, because nothing's inexpensive.
Yeah.
The less expensive, the less restrictive, the more independent, the more socially active environment, if it is appropriate for somewhere, is where they should be. A lot of times people feel like if mom or dad have issues or need help, that they think back to maybe when they when their parents were doing it for their grandparents, there weren't these assisted living independent in a lot of cases, and the only option was a nursing home or an old folks home or whatever other term. So it's helping them understand the differences between those levels of care, what makes someone appropriate for one of those three levels of social model of senior living versus, a nursing home. And then there are other things, there are other services too that can come into play that can happen kind of regardless of what setting you're in: hospice care, palliative care, visiting nurses, there's just, and then there are other things that aren't at all related to care. They're just related to services that you need. Getting connected with elder care attorneys who can help you do estate planning, because as you go through this process, you have to start worrying about asset protection, and you have to start worrying about estate planning and different things, or a certified financial planner who focuses on that sort of thing. So it touches, although the core is living, it touches on a lot of sort of ancillary areas that are connected to it.
Are these services widely available? Are they in every community, or are they restricted? So people would have to necessarily move out of a community that they're used to living in? And
It's a good question. It sort of depends. This is a challenge I face with a lot of my clients in the Berkshires. The Berkshires is less populated, than other
Right.
parts of Western Massachusetts. The hill towns, the areas between, maybe the Pioneer Valley, the I-91 corridor, and some of the larger communities in the Berkshires like Pittsfield, Lenox, Great Barrington. There's not a lot between
Right.
there might be some nursing homes, but you're not going to find a lot of those independent living, assisted living, and memory care communities. So it kind of really depends where you're coming from. But here, just thinking sort of up and down I-91, the kind of the major part of my territory, there are communities in Northampton, Amherst, Belchertown, Ludlow, Holyoke, South Hadley, Northampton, East Hampton, Springfield, Westfield, So if depending on where you live, you can generally find, when I do a search for people and I match them with communities, I generally start with sort of a 15-mile radius. And usually you can find several options within that radius. Now, if they're willing to go further, we can expand it. And now, if you lived in, a town, a Russell or a Granville or something,
Right.
it is a little more difficult because you might have to come towards Westfield or
Right.
or go out towards the Berkshires. So it's a good question, but that's what I help families do is understand where are those communities, what are the relative pros and cons for them in terms of cost, location, services. And so forth. But in general, what I'll say is looking at the trends of our aging population and the number of people who are turning 65 and 85 every year, I do have a lot of concerns that there are not enough of these communities
Yeah, I was just going to ask you because
to keep up.
My generation,
Right.
The baby boomer generation, is just a huge burgeoning group of people that are moving into
Yep.
that age group, and
Right.
they're going to need these services more and more.
Going to need them more and more. And I think it's good to see, just in the 4 years that I've been here, I know of 2 or 3 places that have been built, brand new communities, which is great. Some of my colleagues in more urban settings, in the Boston area or in, other large cities say that, there seems like there's an assisted living going up on every corner. So that's good. And I just think that, it seems like we've been slow to react just as a society or as an industry to making sure that there are adequate number of communities and available apartments, especially in the memory care. That's typically a smaller part of assisted living. It seems like, especially with the pandemic, sad to say that a lot of folks who maybe had a cognitive diagnosis but were doing well, that the pandemic was not helpful and was not kind to them in that sense, that the increased isolation in many cases, what families are seeing has really kind of accelerated, it seems like,
Right.
or made it at least more prevalent that this is no longer a safe community, a safe setting for, mom or dad. So I do worry about that. But, we have no shortage of great options in this area, thankfully. Really great, good communities, staffed by really dedicated, wonderful people, which is great. So,
Do people keep their cars?
they can.
They're
yeah.
able to leave and
Yeah.
come and go just
Yep.
like their regular homes, or they're not. It's not like once you're there, that's it.
That's it, right? Yeah, it's not like the doors lock at night. Well, the doors do lock at night for their safety, but don't lock at night and lock
Right.
them in. In independent living, most of the residents still drive. There are a number of people in assisted living who drive. And in both of those settings, in traditional assisted living and independent living, residents come and go, as they please. They sometimes come and go on their own, or family members come to pick them up, or they take advantage of the transportation services that the community provides, because generally they will have a car, a van, a bus, and they'll have scheduled transportation. On Mondays and Wednesdays, we do doctor visits. So schedule your appointment on a doctor visit, and we'll give you round-trip transportation. Or Tuesdays, we go to the grocery store or
Right.
the drugstore. There are a number of, it's less common, but there are a number of folks in assisted living who can drive. The real key is if they've been driving at home and it's safe for them to drive, and a doctor hasn't made a determination that they shouldn't be driving, then they can still drive. Memory care residents generally and nursing home residents generally are not driving, but that's why the transportation services are valuable.
So I'm sure the whole issue of reputation and background of these homes.
Yeah.
You know, you hear stories that some are very well run and others
sure.
are a little
Yeah.
less so.
Yep.
How do people best research that? Is that through you? Is that on their own?
I'm part of it, definitely. And there are a lot of things they can do on their own, and I encourage people to do internet searches. I always caveat this because you have to take what you find online, like anything, with a little bit of a grain of salt. You tend to find only the very best and often only the very worst things on there. And what one person says was a horrible experience for them, you can find 4 times as many people who say it was just as good. You know, it was great and it was the perfect place for mom or dad. So what I feel like are the best things are you know, I share my feedback. I don't represent any of the communities. I work with all of them. I find them all very great to work with, very wonderful. I have no interest in directing somebody to a particular community. I put the options in front of them, and they drive the decision making. They tell me option 1, 2, and 3 are the ones I want to tour, and so those are the ones that I set up the tours for. And I whenever possible, I go on the tours with the families, unless they don't want me to, because they can typically benefit from having an extra set of eyes and ears to make sure they come out of there with all their questions. Far better than just sort of looking, because with independent living, assisted living, and memory care, you're not going to find, like you will find with nursing homes, ratings. Nursing homes, skilled nursing facilities are regulated by the Department of Public Health, and they have ratings and for short-term care, rehab, long-term care. They'll be rated for by different organizations, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid, but then also things like the U.S. News and World Report, right, which are just more kind of third-party ratings. But they'll give them ratings for, have they had health code violations, have they had turnover in staffing. It's easier to get, and that information is only so helpful, I think, with a nursing home. It doesn't tell the full story. You can't find ratings, and you can find online reviews, you can find online comments for sure about the independent living, assisted living, and memory care. Far better is to go there and see it for yourself. Request when you're there, which is something I'll help with, to talk to family members of residents who are there. How has your experience been as the son and daughter, who's sort of the family contact for mom and dad? When you go there to visit, if you can schedule a time, and we're getting back to this now, coming out on whatever side of the pandemic we're on currently, where they will offer to have you come in with mom or dad for a lunch or for a dinner, and sit with residents and get the real story of what is life like there? How's the food? That's the most valuable thing to me. If you know any other families who have loved ones there, who had loved ones there in the past, talking to them, you're going to get much more reliable information than anything you're going to find online. And I would say it's more valuable than what I can tell you too. I can tell you what my experience has been and what families have shared with me, but talking to the families and the residents and the staff is what's going to give you the best information.
Yeah, interesting. So are these rental situations? Are they ownership situations? What are the costs? How do people pay for it?
That's great. This is where we usually spend the majority of our time.
Yeah, I'll bet.
So there are two, for just to simplify it, there are kind of two kinds of communities from a kind of a financial standpoint. In all cases, really, when I'm talking about independent assisted living and memory care, you're renting. You'll hear and it's rental only. It's a landlord-renter arrangement, and you can give 30 or 60 days notice depending on the terms of the community, and you can leave without breaking any kind of a lease, for example. So it's month to month, essentially. You'll hear of some communities that are often referred to as CCRCs, which is continuing care retirement communities. And a lot of times I'll get clients who will call me and say, well, for that, there's a buy-in. You got to buy in. And I tell them, that's true. They use the term buy-in. The communities generally don't. The general public does. Communities will use a different term, and they'll call it a community fee or an entrance fee. But you're not really buying the unit that you're living in. You're buying into the continuum of care. is what you're doing. So you're putting down, whereas with this first option that's rental only, you might have an entrance fee. There might be a one-time upfront fee of a few $1,000s, which goes towards overhauling an apartment that someone else had been living in, new carpet, paint, all that stuff, new appliances if they need them. The application process, they, assess whether the person is appropriate for their living community. With the CCRCs and certain other communities, you might have what's referred to as a large buy-in, which can be $150,000, $200,000 or more, and then you're paying a monthly fee on top of it. Well, what is that? If you're not buying something, what is that huge chunk of money for?
Right.
It is to generally those communities, because they're called continuing care, have within one campus or within a series of campuses not only independent living, assisted living, and memory care, but also a nursing home. So what you're doing is you're using that money to sort of secure the care that you need for the rest of your life, and the security of knowing that you don't ever have to leave. There are other communities that are wonderful communities, but they might be independent living only, and you might move in there and you might be independent for 10, 15 years, and your needs might change to the point where bringing in help is not enough and you need to be in assisted living, and you're likely going to at that point have to move from that community to another community. It might be in the same town, it might be in a different town. That quote-unquote buy-in is typically, there are options. It can be non-refundable, but they usually offer options where it is 80 to 90% refundable. And so without getting into all the weeds, it can be an option for people who can afford it, from having money from the sale of a home or just their life savings, retirement savings, to secure their care for the rest of their lives, but then also be able to preserve some of that money to pass on to their estate. So it's complex. And what I tell people, I'll give them try to give them the 30,000 foot, overview.
Right.
But you really have to go into the communities, sit down with the communities, let them explain, because no one place does it exactly the same as the other. They all have their own way of doing it. And so what I want my clients to do is to come out of there understanding the basics of it, getting a good feel for it, understanding whether or not financially that's a good fit for them, what the pros and cons are, and be in a position to make, a decision one way or the other.
Could they run out of money?
Many do. It's not uncommon.
Are they thrown out?
So great question. It is probably the thing that I spend the most time talking about, because the reality for most seniors is that whatever you have worked hard all your life to save, whatever amount it is, the cost of independent assisted and memory care is not cheap. It's expensive. I mean, just to give you an idea, around here in Western Massachusetts, a 1-bedroom apartment for independent living could be, $3,000 to $4,000 a month. And I'll explain more what comes with that. Average, I did a study recently of 1-bedroom apartments in assisted living is probably somewhere between, $5,000 and $5,400 a month.
Wow.
Memory care can be $6,000 to $9,000 a month. Well, most seniors are living on Social Security as their monthly income, sometimes a pension, and have whatever assets they have that could be tied up in a home or could be the things that I mentioned, savings or at $6,000 a month, just to use a round number, your assets can deplete very quickly. If you're getting $2,000 a month in Social Security income, you have to tap into your assets quite a bit.
Yeah.
It is, depending on your age and your health, you can quote unquote outlive your assets. Well, what happens? There are most senior living communities, not just here, are private pay, meaning that you pay the full market rate, and when you can no longer pay it, you can no longer live there. Now, nobody's throwing anybody out on the street. I mean, they work with families to help, know enough ahead of time that if this person has to transition to a different community that has financial assistance options or a nursing home, they will help with that. Thankfully, there are a number of great communities that do offer what I kind of call spend down options. So that when you get to that point where you can no longer afford because your assets are depleted, there are a number of great programs that are offered, outside of the communities. There are a number of great programs that the communities offer themselves that will allow you to stay there, especially if you've been there private paying for a number of years, at a monthly rate that you can afford based on your income. That's the easiest way to describe it. Again, every community does it differently, but what is important is if you know that mom or dad is likely to be in that situation, then I don't want you to only be looking at places that are 100% private pay because you're going to be going through this process again in 3, 5, 10 years.
Right.
I at least want you to know that if you choose that option, which is their choice, that is something that you're going to face. So again, there's no simple answers, unfortunately, to any of these questions because they're great questions, and the reality is just very complex.
No question, but certainly stuff that you have to think about.
Definitely. Yeah.
So, sitting here thinking about the fact that once a family or person decides to move, the decision of what to sell, what to bring with them, what to keep, what to get rid of.
How do you do it?
How do you do it?
It's great. No.
I'm looking at my house and I'm thinking, it's just my wife and I, and we moved into that house with nothing, and it is stuffed.
Yep.
And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I hope I go before anybody else because
so
I don't
have to deal
the responsibility of getting rid of all this.
Again, it's another good question because it sometimes can be a thing that just is such a mental hurdle that people just say, I'm just going to keep living here because I can't deal with it. Thankfully, there are excellent companies, services, move managers. There are companies that just specialize in decluttering and downsizing. There are companies right here in the Pioneer Valley that will come in and they will, as part of their service, they will help you evaluate which things are get rid of. Like if they've been in a box and you've lived here for 20 years and you've never used them in the last 20 years and they don't have any sentimental value, this is probably a get rid of, donate, throw in the trash. Which things are things that you actually need to bring with you? Because in all of these situations, independent, assisted, and memory care, these are unfurnished apartments. You are bringing a bed, a chair, you're bringing stuff in, your pictures.
You're bringing your own furniture.
The idea is to recreate some sort of semblance of your home, even on a smaller scale, in this apartment. They do offer furnished apartments for short-term respite stays, but for long-term, it's generally, you bring your own stuff. So what stuff are you going to bring with you? What stuff could you sell, pass on to your family in whatever way you choose? And if you truly have some genuinely valuable antiques, then part of what they will do will connect you with auction services, things like that. So my advice always to people is, and this is advice that if I flash forward 20 years, I'm probably not going to take myself because it's difficult to do this, but is to do it kind of piecemeal and start the process early if you can, because a lot of times people are making these moves into the communities in crisis mode. Mom or dad has fallen, had surgery, can't go home, and now it falls on the kids a senior, if he or she is alone, in a less than ideal situation to try to coordinate all that stuff. So if you can start that process gradually, it makes life much easier, but just know there are services available to help you with that. Very specifically dealing with the emotional implications of getting rid of a lifetime's worth of stuff. Right?
Yeah. There's all these memories attached to it, and
it's not easy.
No, it really isn't. I wanted to ask what the advantages. What are the advantages of living in a senior living situation or actually, I like the term, a senior living community versus living in your own home? Is there a point where, my mother, I think she passed away when she was 92, always lived in her own home. I did not want to go into a senior living situation. Now I'm kind of reflecting back on it. But I always felt that she was really isolated.
Yeah.
Because she couldn't get around very well. She was still going out and doing her grocery shopping and say, "How you doing with the car, Mom?" Well, I'm kind of driving 25 miles an hour. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm thinking about the
worrying about
lined
what
up
that
behind her and stuff. But she never wanted to go into a senior living situation. But she was also, depressed because she lost all her friends. Yeah. She's the last one of her family. All her sisters, parents. That generation of relatives were gone. It was just her and her children, us. But I always felt that she was really isolated.
Yeah. Well, you hit on one of them. My answer typically is that there are 4 S's that I point to that are the benefits of it. They're safety, they are supervision, they are socialization, hitting on the isolation thing, and they are supervision. Did I say that one already?
Yep.
Safety, supervision, security, and socialization.
Security.
Yeah. Or support, actually, really, versus security so much. But for someone who is isolated, being in a senior living community provides on-site, easily accessible activities for socialization and engagement, which can be very helpful for people, who are dealing with cognitive diagnoses, to kind of when you're by yourself, you tend to your space not only tends to narrow, but your focus tends to narrow. You tend to start to let things fall by the wayside that you didn't used to do. My mom always told me, she's like, she was very specific about balancing her checkbook. She said, if you ever find that my checkbook is not balanced to the penny, then it's time for me to, I probably need more help, because, and the other people have told me, if I am not dressed to the nines, by 9 a.m. with nice clothes and lipstick on, and I'm in sweatpants, that means, I'm struggling, I'm not doing well. So being in a community like that with people who can help you, but also knowing that when you go down to dinner, that there are other people who are going to be there and see you, can kind of help be a motivating factor to kind of keep your daily routine going, which is great, to participate in activities. So many seniors who move in and their family members don't think they're ever going to be involved in activities find what they call the senior second wind, and they take up things, whether it's discussion groups about current events, or they start painting or doing some sort of craft or gardening or things they've never done before, because it's right there. There is an activities director who is saying, here's all the stuff that's available. And they can do it with other people their age, with peers that they have things in common with, that they may even know from whatever community they lived in. It's the ability to do things safely with support. So the ADLs, the showering, the dressing, and so forth. So if somebody is having, consistent falls, I can't tell you how many times people have called me and said, I went to visit mom and I found her on the floor. She didn't have her phone nearby. She couldn't,
Right.
Not to say that falls are going to disappear in a senior living community, but they're going to have an emergency response system. They're going to be well checks built in. If they don't see them at dinner, they're going to come and check on them. So you're not going to have that situation where someone's going to be on the floor for 3 days or something like that. So that's really it. It's that sort of nice living environment with an appropriate level of privacy and independence, but with this sort of bubble of those things around you: the supervision, the safety, the opportunity for socialization. That's what I would say are the, and that's not only for the senior, that's the peace of mind for the family,
Right.
too.
Right.
So
how involved does the transition? How involved does it get with the transition when you're moving from your home into a, see if I get the term right, a senior living community?
Yep, you got it. Yeah.
I mean, there's a big transition there.
There's
a big adjustment.
Yeah. So there's the physical transition, and then there's emotional transition. And the physical transition, what's nice is once you've been connected to a community and you say, I like this place for mom or dad likes this place, the folks there are supremely helpful in getting you the help that you need with that physical transition. So with hey, we work with these 3 moving companies. You don't have to go online and try to figure it out. They're reputable. They're used to moving here. They know our process. They will work with us to come a day ahead of time and have it all set up so that when mom or dad move in, they're seeing familiar things in their apartment. So that's part of it. There is a settling in period. There's no question. I mean, imagine, any move, you're adapting to a new space, but here you're not. It's just not a new space. It's a new lifestyle in a sense.
Okay.
But that is also where the communities are very helpful. They'll assign other residents who are sort of there to kind of help as the welcome wagon or help shepherd the person into feeling, like they belong in this community, because it's their home, and they should never feel like I'm living in someone else's home and I'm not comfortable here, and so I'm scared to come out of my home, or I'm reluctant to come out of my home. So again, no one's going to force anybody to do anything, but they'll make sure they meet people. They introduce them around. They usually have some sort of mixer to welcome new residents every month, and celebrate birthdays every month and things like that. And so there is a built-in process for easing that transition. Families visiting regularly can really aid with that. And also buzzing off from time to time and leaving mom or dad to settle in on their own, you know, and not feel
right.
like they need constant checking in by the family. So it's a balance. It's for sure, but thankfully it's not like moving into a new apartment complex where it's up to you. You're surrounded by a staff of people there,
right.
activities director,
There's a
wellness
support
people
system.
who are helping guide that process.
Yeah, really interesting.
Yeah.
So how do people get in touch with you? Obviously, you know your stuff. And you are a wealth of information. This
Probably more than you were asking for.
Well, no, this has been great because this is what we wanted, which
Yeah.
was to get a really an important insight
Yeah.
into a really complex question
Great,
and issue, and quite frankly, something that we're all going to be faced with, some of us sooner than others.
some point in
as
time,
I'm looking
yeah.
at the color of my hair versus the color of your
And
hair. But how do people get in touch with you if they want to talk to you about this? Because it's definitely something that they
Yep.
need to be thinking about.
So they can call me, they can email me, they can drop by my home in Belchertown if they want. So I don't know if you want me to share my phone number or web address.
Yeah, you have an office phone number?
Yeah, so
Yep, sure.
my cell phone, which is my only number, have it with me all the time, is 413-351-6577.
Give that one more time.
Sure, 413-351-6577.
Okay.
And I try to answer whenever I can. Often, you know, I'm with families touring and I've got it turned off, but just leave a message and I'll get back to you for sure. That's my cell. So you can also send me a text if you're somebody who doesn't like calling, and just say, hey, I heard about you, was referred to you. Can you give me a call when you have a moment?
Oh, yeah.
Rather than reading out my long email address and web address, what I would say is if you just Google Oasis Senior Advisors Western Mass, you'll find me. You'll see my picture there on the web page. You'll find an Oasis website where you can find Oasis advisors in any part of the country. But if you're living here in Western Mass, it'll default to me because it's by region. Send me an email. There's a form. You can also fill it on my website asking for information or asking to be contacted. One thing I'll say is that unlike a lot of other companies that do this sort of thing, when you reach out to me and I'm going to meet with you, we're HIPAA compliant. We keep all your information private. We don't share personal health information. And even when I have referred you, I've matched you with communities and I've sent your name and where you live. John Smith, Westfield, Mass, needs some help with ADLs. Looking at assisted living. That's what I send to the communities, that kind of general information. When we go to visit them, I don't ever share your phone number, your email address, your address, any way for the communities or anybody else to contact you until you're ready for that to be shared. Because having been in seniors' homes, I know that the phone rings every 30 seconds with someone trying to sell them a reverse mortgage or a personal emergency response system or a drug or something. And so I want to protect them from, as great as these communities are. My role is to sort of help be your concierge and be the go-between between you and the community until you found a place that you're comfortable with. And then it's, of course, up to you. You can share your information and deal with that person directly. But what I'm trying to do is protect you in the interim from, a bombardment of phone calls and email addresses from various people, which, you might not be ready for that. You might be just gathering information, just getting pricing. And so that's kind of a hallmark of how I work. And it's important because I know it's important to seniors. They ask about it.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, Eric, I want to thank you for coming in.
you.
This has been a wealth of information. I really encourage our viewers. This is a topic that obviously is really critical to all of us at some point. I'm thinking that I'm going to be faced with this, and Eric, I'll be calling you at some point when I want to start talking to you about this. But it's really a critical topic, a lot of information here. And I would really encourage people to, and I'm guessing there may be other services similar to this, but go on the website of Oasis Senior Advisors in Western Massachusetts. You're going to find a lot of information. I would encourage you to give a call to Eric at 413-351-6577. Call or text. Set up an appointment. He'll come out to see you. It is very confidential, or you could even find a place of, if you don't want him coming to your home or your residence, you could find a mutually suitable place that both of you can meet in. But it is a topic that really is complex from the standpoint of thinking about the fact that you are now leaving a situation you've been in for a very long period of time, going into, as he refers, a senior living community. A lot of pluses to that. Obviously, there's some downsides compared to what you've been used to in your own personal life, but an awful lot of plus sides, and we're all going to be faced with the fact that we're going to need more care. And we do get more isolated as we get older, and some of our friends and family have passed on, and we find ourselves a little bit more by ourselves. So, Eric Osheim.
Perfect.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you again for coming in. Oasis Senior Advisors in Western Massachusetts. Eric is a certified living advisor. Clearly knows his stuff, and I think he is an individual that you would feel very comfortable in talking with. So I want to thank Pete Coles, who is our WCPC Westfield Cable Channel 15 producer and chief engineer, for his help and support to make this show possible, and also to Tina Gorman, the executive director of the Westfield Senior Center. So on behalf of Pete Coles, Tina Gorman, I am Harry Rock. This has been another edition of the Westfield Council on Aging Presents on WCPC Westfield Cable Channel 15. Have a great day, everybody.